The world of Eloria was unlike any Marcus had ever seen. Towering mountains stretched like jagged teeth into the skies, their peaks cloaked in violet mist. Alien birds with crystalline wings wheeled overhead, their haunting calls echoing across the valleys. Beneath those heights lay the ancient fortress of the Veyron clan, carved into the living rock itself. Its walls bore scars of centuries, marks of old battles fought, defended, and won. To the Veyron, honor was everything. They were a warrior people, bound by oaths and sharpened by conflict. Their traditions were ironclad, their laws unyielding. Among them, strength of bloodline and the sanctity of their heir were guarded with near-fanatic devotion. Outsiders rarely came, and those who did seldom left alive. That was why Marcus's presence within their halls was a miracle in itself. Marcus was no warrior by trade. A human born on Earth, he had carved a life not with weapons, but with words. A linguist, an explorer, a recorder of forgotten histories, he wandered the galaxy with curiosity as his compass. Where others saw danger, Marcus saw stories waiting to be discovered. His notebooks were filled with alien songs, dialects, forgotten alphabets, and fragments of epics that even their own people had nearly forgotten. It was this passion that had brought him to the Veyron. He had spent years piecing together fragments of their language, tracing it across scattered ruins and forgotten archives until he reached the source. The fortress was his destination, but he had expected rejection, perhaps even execution, for daring to step upon their lands. Yet something in his manner, his humility, his fascination, perhaps his refusal to raise a weapon when surrounded, had convinced the High Blade to grant him audience. Thus Marcus found himself a guest among a people who despised guests. From the first day, the warriors of the clan looked upon him with suspicion. Their gazes lingered on his pale Terran skin, his smaller frame, the softness of his hands compared to their calloused, scarred ones. They whispered among themselves, "Why was he here? What did he want? Why had the High Blade not already cast him from the mountain?" But Marcus did not shrink beneath their scorn. He listened. He watched. He asked questions in broken phrases of their tongue, and though they mocked his clumsy accent, his determination chipped slowly at their disdain. It was in the great hall of the keep that he first laid eyes on Lady Selyra. She was nothing like the fragile princesses of human fairy tales. Selyra stood tall, her bearing proud, despite the silken robes that marked her as heir. Her eyes, silver like tempered steel, carried the sharpness of one who had grown up beneath the weight of expectation. Her hair, dark as obsidian, framed features that were both stern and striking. The daughter of the High Blade, she was to the Veyron what the fortress itself was to the mountains, a symbol of strength, lineage, and unbroken tradition. Yet Marcus saw something else. Beneath the practiced stoicism, there was curiosity, an unspoken hunger for knowledge of the worlds beyond her clan's borders. Their gazes met only briefly across the hall, but in that instant, Marcus felt a connection, fragile and unnameable. Still, he kept his distance. Of all the clan's treasures, none was more revered than the clan sword. Mounted upon the dais of the great hall, it gleamed with a subtle inner light, forged from a metal that seemed almost alive. Legends claimed it was a gift from the stars, a blade that had never dulled, carried through 100 generations of Veyron heirs. It was not simply a weapon, it was a bond. Marcus noted it in his journal, describing the intricate runes along the hilt, the way even the warriors lowered their heads as they passed it. He had no way of knowing its deeper meaning, nor the law tied to it, that no hand outside the bloodline could wield it without invoking the most sacred vow of their people, the vow of betrothal. But Marcus was oblivious. To him, it was another fascinating artifact, a story to be unraveled. He admired it, as a scholar would admire a relic, never suspecting that one day his hand would grip its hilt, and in doing so, bind his fate to Lady Selyra's forever. That night as the torches flickered and alien songs filled the hall, Marcus wrote in his notebook, never imagining that history itself was waiting to turn its gaze upon him. And the sword, silent and gleaming above the dais, seemed to wait as well. Long banners of crimson and black unfurled from the vaulted ceiling of the great hall, swaying gently in the draught from the mountain winds. Torches blazed along the stone walls, casting golden light over the carved pillars that told centuries of clan victories. Tables stretched the length of the chamber, heavy with food Marcus had never imagined existed outside myth. Roasted sky serpents glistening with herbs, fruits that glowed faintly in the dim light, bread spiced with minerals that shimmered like stars. It was a feast to honor the Veyren's enduring might, and though Marcus barely believed it, his own survival as a guest among them. The human sat near the far end, his modest frame swallowed by the towering warriors around him. He kept his notes close, scribbling observations whenever he dared. The cadences of their songs fascinated him. Their verses were battles retold as though they had just happened, each voice overlapping until the air itself shook. When the cups of flame wine were passed his way, he smiled politely, taking the smallest sip before coughing as its fire burned his throat, earning a ripple of laughter from the warriors nearby. At the head of the hall sat the High Blade, his presence commanding. Silence whenever his gaze swept across the crowd. And at his side was Lady Selira. She carried herself with quiet dignity, but Marcus noticed her eyes more than once wandering the hall, lingering on him briefly before shifting away. For a moment, Marcus allowed himself to breathe. He thought of Earth, of quiet nights spent buried in books. He thought of how far he had come, how unlikely it was that he, a human scholar, sat at the heart of one of the galaxy's most feared warrior clans. Perhaps, he dared to hope, there might be a place for him here. Then the hall erupted in screams. The first sign was a crash, the shattering of stained crystal windows above as shadowed figures poured through. The music broke into chaos, warriors leaping to their feet as blades flashed in the firelight. The Zeranth had come. Marcus had heard whispers of them, rivals who had nursed grudges for generations. Unlike the disciplined Veyren, the Zeranth were wild, their armor jagged, their weapons curved like talons. Their war cries echoed like shrieks of dying beasts as they swarmed the tables, cutting down startled celebrants before they could draw steel. Panic consumed the hall. Benches overturned, platters of food scattered, and the smell of blood and smoke began to choke the air. Marcus dropped to the floor, heart hammering in his chest. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't trained for this. He ducked beneath a fallen table, clutching his notebook against him as though it could shield him from the chaos. Around him, the Veyren fought with a ferocity that seemed almost unreal. Clashing steel, guttural war songs, the thunder of fists and blades. And then he saw her, Selira. She had been separated from her father in the chaos. A cluster of guards had tried to shield her, but one by one they fell beneath the Zeranth's blades. Now she was cornered, pressed against the dais by two towering warriors, their jagged sabers raised high. Marcus's mind screamed at him to stay hidden, to wait, to survive. But his body moved before thought could stop it. He scrambled from cover, slipping on spilled wine and blood, his eyes darting frantically for a weapon. A fallen dagger lay too far away. A spear was broken in half. Then his gaze lifted, and there it was, the clan sword, mounted above the dais, its dark steel glimmering like a star captured in metal. Marcus didn't think. He didn't know the law. He didn't know the weight of what he was about to do. All he knew was that if he didn't act, Selira would die. He leapt onto the dais, fingers closing around the hilt. The sword resisted at first, humming faintly as though testing his resolve. Then with a jolt that sent shivers up his arm, it came free. The nearest Zeranth turned, snarling. Marcus raised the blade clumsily, both hands gripping the hilt. The alien lunged, sabers flashing, But Marcus's instincts, honed from years of martial training on Earth, though never tested in war, kicked in. He parried. Sparks erupted as steel struck steel. His arms ached under the weight, but he forced the enemy back, then struck, driving the blade through his chest. The second warrior roared, swinging low. Marcus pivoted awkwardly, the sword almost dragging him off balance, but he brought it up in time, catching the blow. The impact rattled his bones. With a desperate cry, Marcus shoved forward, slashing across the alien's leg. The Ziranth staggered, and Marcus did not hesitate. He drove the sword deep into his side, twisting until the foe collapsed. Silence fell around them. Marcus stood panting, blood splattered across his face, his knuckles white on the hilt of the sword. Selira stared at him, wide-eyed, lips parted in shock. The human had protected her. With the clan's sword, all across the hall, eyes turned toward him, not in gratitude, not in relief, but in stunned, horrified recognition of what he had done. Marcus, still gasping for air, looked around, bewildered. "What? I just wanted to help." But already whispers rippled through the hall. The law was clear, and Marcus, without knowing, had bound himself to a fate he could not yet imagine. The great hall stank of blood and smoke. The feast that had begun with song and laughter now lay in ruin. Tables were overturned, food trampled, torches guttering as the last of the Ziranth assassins were dragged away, their bodies broken and bleeding. And at the center of it all stood Marcus, still gripping the clan's sword. The blade dripped with alien blood, its runes glowing faintly as though awakened by the violence. His breath came in ragged bursts, his muscles trembling with exhaustion. He barely comprehended what he had just done. He had fought. He had killed. He had protected Selira when no one else was near enough to intervene. But instead of thanks, he was met with silence. Hundreds of eyes fixed on him, warriors, servants, elders, even children peering from the edges of the hall. Their expressions were not those of admiration. They were something else entirely. Shock. Horror. And beneath it, a strange inevitability, as if fate itself had just stepped into the room. The high blade rose slowly from his seat. He was a towering figure draped in ceremonial armor, his presence heavy enough to silence even the wounded, his gaze locked on Marcus, and when he spoke, his voice thundered through the chamber. "You dare." Marcus swallowed hard, his grip on the sword loosening, though he did not drop it. I just wanted to help. She was in danger. I didn't have a choice." The high blade descended the dais steps like a mountain walking. Each stride was slow, deliberate, the weight of centuries pressing down on every word. "The sword of Veyron is no tool for outsiders. No foreign hand may touch it. And you—" His voice rose into a roar that shook the rafters. "You have not only touched it, you have wielded it in defense of the heir." Marcus blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, I didn't know—" "Silence," the high blade thundered, and the hall obeyed. Even the crackle of flames seemed to hush. He turned, his voice carrying the gravity of judgment. "The law of the sword is older than this fortress. It was carved in oath when our ancestors first bled for this mountain. The one who takes up the clan's sword in protection of the heir is no mere warrior. He is bound, by our law, by our tradition, by the oath of steel. He is betrothed." The words fell like a stone into the silence. Betrothed. Marcus's heart nearly stopped. He stared, wide-eyed, looking from the high blade to Selira, then back to the sword in his hands. "Wait, betrothed? You mean married?" The hall erupted, not in celebration, but in chaos. Some warriors shouted in outrage, voices rising, like a storm. "Impossible!" cried one. "A human cannot take the bond," yelled another. Some laughed cruelly, the sound sharp as broken glass. Others whispered among themselves, their eyes darting between Marcus and Sailora, already calculating what this accident meant for the future of their clan. Marcus felt the weight of their stares like 1,000 blades. He wanted to protest, to explain, to shout that he had not known, that he had only acted to save a life. But the law, it seemed, did not care for intent. It cared only for action, and the action was undeniable. Sailora herself sat frozen. Her silver eyes were wide, her lips parted, and for a moment Marcus feared she might object, might denounce him before them all. But she said nothing. She lowered her gaze, her hands trembling in her lap. Not acceptance, but not rejection either. The High Blade's voice cut through the noise. By ancient right, it is done. The human has taken the bond. He is betrothed to my daughter, heir of the Veyren. His life and blood are now tied to ours. The hall shook with reaction. Some knelt reluctantly, acknowledging the judgment. Others stormed out in fury, muttering of dishonor. The air itself seemed to pulse with tension, as though the very walls of the fortress recoiled from what had just been declared. Marcus, pale and unsteady, finally lowered the sword. It felt heavier now, as though it carried not just steel, but destiny itself. He wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. A scholar, a linguist, a man who had spent his life among books, not battlefields. And now he was promised to the heir of one of the fiercest warrior clans in the galaxy. He had come to learn their words. Instead, he had stumbled into becoming part of their story. Sailora raised her gaze at last, meeting his eyes across the hall. There was no smile, no reassurance. Only a silent, unspoken acknowledgement that both their lives had just changed forever. Marcus had not left the Veyren fortress, though part of him longed to flee. The moment he had touched the clan's sword, the fortress had ceased to be a place of study. It had become a cage of expectation. No longer a guest, he was now something. Stranger, the outsider who had been bound by law to the heir, and the clan did not forget. Everywhere he walked, eyes followed. Warriors spat on the floor as he passed, muttering curses under their breath. Servants who once brought him meals with cautious courtesy now placed bowls before him without meeting his gaze. Some called him a thief of honor. Others, more venomously, whispered that he had schemed it all, tricking their traditions to force his way into their bloodline. Marcus tried to ignore them, but he could not ignore the bruises. The challenges began the very next morning. Warriors stepped into his path, demanding combat. Some framed it as tests of worth, but Marcus knew what it truly was: humiliation. They wanted to break him. The first duel nearly did. He was dragged into the training yard, surrounded by jeering onlookers. His opponent was twice his size, with arms like tree trunks and a sneer that promised pain. The wooden training swords cracked against Marcus's ribs and shoulders until he was gasping, barely able to lift his own weapon. But though he fell, though blood filled his mouth, he forced himself back to his feet every time. "Yield!" the warrior barked, raising his weapon for the finishing blow. "No!" Marcus spat, his voice trembling but defiant. The duel ended. Only when Marcus collapsed outright, body refusing to obey. But even then, he never said the word of surrender. That small act earned him no respect, but it planted the first seed of doubt among his enemies. Perhaps this human was not as soft as they thought. The days stretched into weeks, and the pattern repeated. Duels, bruises, broken bones that the healers bound with gruff hands. He trained in secret when he could, forcing his body to grow accustomed to the alien weight of their weapons. His Terran martial arts gave him an edge. His movements were strange, unpredictable, catching even seasoned fighters off guard. Little by little, he began to lose less disastrously. But it was not the warriors who surprised him most. It was Sailora. At first, she had been distant, speaking only when required, her voice cool and measured. She had not chosen this bond, after all. To her, Marcus was as much a stranger as to the rest of her clan. And yet, unlike them, she never spat venom at him. She observed. She listened. When Marcus staggered back from a duel one evening, blood trickling from a split lip, he found her waiting at the edge of the training yard. She said nothing at first, simply handed him a cloth. When he reached for it, their fingers brushed, and for the first time, her eyes softened. "You fight poorly," she said, almost wry. "But you do not give up." Marcus managed to grin through the pain. Story of my life. That small exchange grew into others. She began to meet him in the courtyard, asking about his world, its oceans, its skies, its languages. In turn, he asked about hers, and for the first time she spoke not of duty or tradition, but of her own secret dreams, to walk beyond the fortress walls, to see the stars without guards at her side, to be more than an heir locked in ceremony. He found himself laughing with her, even in his battered state. She found herself smiling at his stubbornness, his clumsy jokes, his refusal to bend even when it would be easier. Slowly, the tension between them shifted into something neither could name. The clan still doubted him. Many still hated him. But Marcus began to realize that survival here was no longer just about proving himself to them. It was about proving himself to her. And Sayalira, though she did not say it aloud, began to wonder if perhaps fate, cruel and capricious as it was, had not erred entirely. The bond had been forged in blood and steel, a law neither of them had chosen. But as days turned into weeks, and bruises turned into trust, Marcus understood something vital. This was not just about surviving their judgment. It was about becoming worthy of her. The great hall of the Cariel stronghold was filled with hushed voices, the flickering light of torches casting long shadows across the carved stone pillars. At the far end of the chamber, atop a dais, the ancient seat of the clan elders loomed, an oak throne older than any living soul. It was here that judgments were made, alliances forged, and destinies bound. Tonight, all eyes were fixed not upon an elder, but upon a human. Marcus stood before the gathering, the clan's ceremonial sword resting across his palms. The blade seemed to hum faintly, its etched runes glowing as though the weapon itself recognized him. Around him, armored guards kept their distance, not out of hostility but out of reverence, for no one dared touch the blade unless chosen. Behind him, Lyra sat among the elders, her golden eyes soft with pride. Yet her hands were clenched in her lap. The moment of truth had arrived, and though she had defended Marcus at every turn, the decision lay not with her, but with the laws of her people. The eldest counselor, High Matron Salrine, leaned forward. Her face was a map of centuries, her voice sharp as steel. "You wielded the sword of Cariel to defend our bloodline, outsider. Tradition binds you now, as surely as chains." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The ancient vow was clear. The one who defended the heir of the clan with the sacred blade became their shield for life. Husband, partner, protector. The vow was older than the stars themselves, meant to ensure that the clan's strongest always stood beside its heir. Marcus bowed his head respectfully. "I did not seek this," he said, his voice steady though his heart thundered in his chest. "I fought to save her, nothing more. If my actions dishonored your customs, I apologize. But," Salrine shook her head, "you dishonor nothing human. You honor our law. You have proven strength, loyalty, and the courage to raise the blade when others would falter. The bond cannot be undone." Lyra finally rose to her feet, her slender figure framed in the torchlight. "And I accept him," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the chamber like a clarion call. "He did not fight for glory, nor for power. He fought because he saw me as worth protecting when others saw only burden. If our law demands a vow, then I will not resist it." The hall erupted into overlapping voices, some in agreement, others in outrage. Several warriors shouted that no alien could ever be trusted with the legacy of the clan. Others argued that the sword itself had chosen Marcus, and the blade had never erred. Marcus turned slightly, meeting Lyra's gaze. There was no fear in her expression, only quiet certainty. For a moment, the clamor of the hall fell away, and he understood. This wasn't just about tradition. It was about two lives that had already intertwined the moment he had stepped between her and death. At last, the High Matron raised her staff, striking it against the stone floor. The chamber fell silent. "Then it is decided," she declared. "By the bond of the sword, Marcus of Earth is henceforth betrothed to Lyra of Clan Cariel. May his strength guard her, and may her wisdom guide him. This is the will of our ancestors." The decree hung in the air like a solemn drumbeat. Marcus exhaled slowly, the weight of what had been declared sinking into him. Husband, protector, betrothed. These words were foreign to his mission as a soldier, yet strangely they didn't feel wrong. Lyra stepped forward, her hand trembling, slightly as she extended it. "You may not have sought this," she whispered softly, so only he could hear. "But I am glad fate brought you here." Marcus hesitated only a heartbeat before taking her hand. The warmth of her grip was grounding, steadying. He realized then that what had begun as a chance encounter, a reckless defense with a blade he didn't understand, had transformed into something binding, something bigger than either of them. The hall burst into ceremonial chants as attendants prepared for the traditional sealing ritual. Warriors stomped their feet, the rhythm echoing through the stone walls. Above them, the carved banners of the clan seemed to tremble, as if acknowledging the weight of the moment. For Marcus, it wasn't the chants or the laws that mattered. It was Lyra's hand in his, her presence beside him, and the unspoken promise they now shared. He hadn't come to this world seeking honor, marriage, or destiny, but somehow he had found all three. And as the sword of Cariel pulsed with faint light in his grasp, Marcus knew one thing for certain. Whatever trials lay ahead, he would face them not as an outsider, but as her chosen. Not just protector, not just husband, but partner, in blood, in war, and in fate.